Welcome to our deep dive, everybody. Today we're going to tackle this pretty complex question. Are we on the road to oligarchy?
That is a big question, yeah. And a timely one, I'd say. It seems like everyone's suddenly talking about oligarchy, right?
Yeah, especially after Biden's farewell address,
Yeah.
when he warned about it taking root here in America.
Right. And you can actually see that in the data. Like right after that address, Google searches for oligarchy just spiked.
It's interesting, right? It makes you wonder if maybe people just weren't paying attention or didn't really understand what it was all about.
Maybe. I mean, a good chunk of voters voted for Trump twice. And Mockler, one of the sources you sent over, he suggests that Trump's policies, the way he operates, could be seen as pushing us towards an oligarchy.
Yeah, Mockler brings up Elon Musk, right? And his close ties to the Trump administration. Like, he donated millions to Trump's campaign, and Mockler even says he's supposed to have, like, an office in the White House complex.
Yeah, and Mockler draws this comparison to Russia, where Putin basically demands loyalty from his oligarchs. And if they step out of line, there can be serious consequences, like imprisonment or even exile.
Oh, so are we saying America's like Russia?
No, not exactly. Mockler's not saying that. But he is warning us to, be careful, to pay attention, and to not just blindly accept things without, without questioning what's going on.
Right. So how do we know if we're heading down that road? I mean,
Yeah.
what are the signs of oligarchy we should be looking out for?
Okay, so Mockler and Brooke Harrington, she's a political scientist, they both emphasize that oligarchy isn't just about being rich. It's about using that wealth to influence things outside of like the normal political channels, like having access to those in power and swaying decisions to benefit themselves.
And that's kind of scary when you think about Trump's, the way he approaches politics, right? It's very transactional. It's like he's inviting oligarchs to buy their way in.
Exactly. And Mockler even brings up Jeff Bezos, who said publicly that he wants to help Trump reduce regulations, which could potentially benefit his businesses, but not necessarily, the average American.
Right. So it's like this focus on deals and favors and who benefits, it kind of undermines the whole idea of democracy and accountability.
Yeah, exactly. It creates this system where money equals power, and then that power is used to make more money, and it becomes this cycle that doesn't really benefit anyone but those at the very top.
And if those at the top are only focused on getting richer, it makes you wonder, like, how stable is the whole system, really? And that, I think, brings us to our next source, Richard Wolff, and his warnings about the U.S. economy. He's not exactly optimistic, is he?
No, not really. Wolff argues that the American empire, like all empires that came before, it's showing signs of decline. He uses this like historical framework of empires rising and falling to show that what we're going through, it's not, unique, but it is potentially dangerous.
And he compares us to 1929 Germany, right, where the economy was a mess and people were so desperate they became like vulnerable to extremist ideas. It's a scary thought, given what happened there.
It is. And Wolff points to some really stark trends to back up his argument. He talks about how since the 1970s, real wages have basically stagnated, and people have gone deeper and deeper into debt, which has put a ton of pressure on families.
And that kind of pressure can easily lead to unrest and division, right? And Wolff seems especially concerned about the growing tension with China.
He does. He uses this analogy of David and Goliath to describe the U.S. and Russia, suggesting that, we might be overestimating our own power and underestimating China's economic strength. Wolff even suggests that the conflict in Ukraine might be driven more by wanting to weaken Russia, which is China's ally, than by, actually helping Ukraine itself.
That's a pretty bold statement. Yeah. But he also points out that the influence of the U.S. dollar is weakening as China's economy grows and other currencies become more popular.
Right. It all points to this shift towards a world where the U.S. isn't the only major player anymore. And that means we might need to rethink how we interact with other countries and how we manage our own economy.
So we've got this potential rise of oligarchy in the U.S., this shaky economy, and this whole global landscape that's shifting beneath our feet. So where does this psychology of denial, as explored in that fictional book, Sapience, fit into all of this?
That's where things get really interesting. You see, Sapiens introduces this concept called the corruption, which
Yeah.
is like this force, this underlying force that really undermines cooperation and civility, and it's driven by greed and fear and the pursuit of power.
So basically a recipe for disaster, right? But how does this corruption, like how does it actually play out in the real world? Is it connected to like what Mockler and Wolf are describing?
That's where it gets really interesting. You could argue that this corruption, this fictional concept, is actually a reflection of the problems we've been talking about. It's like a lens to view things like oligarchy and economic instability through, you know.
Okay, so like the rise of oligarchy with people like Musk potentially pulling strings from behind the scenes. Is that a manifestation of this corruption?
It could be, yeah. I mean, think about Mockler's warnings about transactional politics and how it erodes democratic norms. It definitely aligns with this idea of greed and power coming before the well-being of, everyone else.
And what about Wolf's economic warnings? Could those anxieties also feed into this corruption?
Absolutely. When Wolf compares the U.S. to 1929 Germany, it's a stark reminder that when people are struggling financially, they can become more susceptible to extremist ideologies, right? Because they're looking for easy answers, someone to blame.
Right. And that plays right into the hands of those who want to exploit the situation,
Yeah.
right?
Exactly. It becomes a vicious cycle. Economic instability fuels fear and anger, which then makes people more vulnerable to manipulation and extreme ideas.
So it's like the system is kind of rigged to keep us in this cycle of negativity and blame.
In a way, yeah. And the book even goes as far as to suggest that everyone plays a role in either, perpetuating or resisting this corruption. It talks about what it calls losers, haters, and trolls who contribute to the spread of fear and hate and disinformation.
But aren't those people also victims of the system in a way? I mean, if people are feeling disenfranchised and left behind, wouldn't it make sense that they would be drawn to like those simplistic explanations and scapegoats?
That's an important point. The book does acknowledge that these individuals are often products of the very systems they're perpetuating. It's like they've been bombarded with these narratives, these easy answers, and it just becomes a self-perpetuating cycle.
So how do we break that cycle? The book offers this idea of sapience or wisdom as a potential antidote, right?
Yeah. Right. And it argues that we need to develop a higher level of awareness, both as individuals and as a society, if we want to move beyond this corruption. It's about recognizing how interconnected we all are and understanding the root causes of these problems.
So it's not just about pointing fingers or blaming individuals. It's about taking a step back and really looking at the systems that create these conditions in the first place.
Exactly. And that requires a lot of self-reflection. It's about examining our own biases and motivations and asking ourselves, how are we contributing to the problem, even in small ways?
Yeah, it's a tough question to ask. It's much easier to blame others than to look at ourselves.
It is, but the book suggests that true sapience requires courage, the courage to confront uncomfortable truths,
Hmm.
about ourselves and the world we live in.
So it's not enough to just be informed, to have all the facts. It's about like a deeper understanding of our own humanity and how our actions impact others.
Exactly. And the book says that this sapience, this wisdom, it starts with small steps. Like it's about recognizing those connections between all these issues and realizing that even seemingly insignificant actions can have a ripple effect.
So we're not waiting for like a revolution or for someone to come in and fix things. It's about each of us making conscious choices in our own lives that align with the world we want to create.
That's where the real power is. If enough individuals start to shift their thinking to change their behavior, it can really build momentum for change, which is much more powerful than any top-down solution.
Yeah, it's like that saying, be the change you want to see in the world.
Exactly. And even though the book does paint a pretty bleak picture of the challenges we face, it also offers a glimmer of hope. It reminds us that we have the power to choose a different path, so to resist this corruption and to build a future that's more just, more sustainable, more humane.
Yeah. But how do we know if we're on the right path? I mean, it's easy to get caught up in day-to-day life and lose sight of the bigger picture.
That's where the book leaves us with a really powerful question, which is what does true sapience, true wisdom, actually look like when facing all these challenges?
And what would it take to create a world where cooperation and genuine concern for everyone like outweighs all the greed and division we see?
Those are the questions we should all be asking ourselves.
And those are the questions that I hope will stay with you, with all of you, long after this deep dive. But for now, let's just take a step back and revisit the connections we've made between these seemingly unrelated sources. You know,
Okay, so we've talked about oligarchy, the economy, and even denial, right? And it seems like, well, it seems like things aren't looking so good, you know.
yeah,
So what do we do now?
yeah, it can be pretty overwhelming to think about, right? But that's exactly what we can't do. You know, we can't just shut down and ignore it, right? And you know, in *Sapiens*, they talk about how the ancient Egyptians, how they viewed these cycles of corruption and collapse. You know, and it's interesting because they didn't try to fight it with more power or wealth. Instead, they focused on uh, like wisdom, balance, and connecting to something bigger than themselves.
That's a really important point. It suggests that real resilience, real progress, it doesn't come from just clinging to the way things are, you know, or doubling down on the systems that might actually be contributing to the problems. It's about realizing that those systems can be corrupted and finding ways to change them, to create something that's better for everyone, you know, for people and the planet.
So it's not about like rejecting power or structure completely. It's more about like using them wisely, understanding that they can be, good or bad.
Yeah, and that takes us back to that big question from *Sapiens*. What does true wisdom, true sapience look like in the face of all this? What would it actually take to create a future where people work together and genuinely care about each other instead of all this greed and division?
Yeah, that's a question we should all be thinking about,
Yeah.
Not just us here, but everyone.
Absolutely. And it starts with looking at ourselves, you know, and our own beliefs and actions and how we fit into these bigger systems. It's about asking ourselves some tough questions. Are we part of the problem, even in small ways? Are we working towards solutions? Like where do we stand and what are we willing to do about it?
It's about taking responsibility, right?
Right.
Realizing that we're not just watching history happen. We're actually like creating it.
Right. And that future, it's still being written. Every choice we make, every action we take, it all contributes to the story. Even small acts of courage, kindness, wisdom, you know, they can have a ripple effect. They can inspire others and maybe even change things a little bit.
So it's not about waiting for someone else to fix things or for some big revolution. It's about each of us taking responsibility for our part, understanding that even small efforts can make a difference.
That's where the real power is, you know. It's in the collective actions of people who choose to live in a way that aligns with the world they want to see. It's not, you know, it's not a perfect process. It's a journey of learning and making mistakes and trying again.
It's about choosing hope instead of giving up,
Yeah.
choosing to do something instead of doing nothing, and believing that a better future is possible, even if we don't know exactly what it looks like yet.
And maybe that's what sapience really is, you know. It's the wisdom to face these really complex challenges with open eyes and a commitment to making the world a better place, a more just place, a more sustainable place.
So I guess that leaves all of us with one final thought. What will you do? How will you how will you choose to shape the future? Because ultimately it is in our hands.